Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Kids, 1995, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. It opens not with a scream, not with violence, but with a kiss. A moment soft and tender, until you realize it's anything but innocent. The boy is young, too young to hold this kind of control in his mouth, in his hands. The girl, even younger. This is how it starts. In a bedroom drenched in summer haze, a television hums in the background, and a teenager whispers all the right lies. What follows is not a story of heroes and arcs, not a tale told in redemption or catharsis. It's a descent, not into madness, but into reality. A world that hides behind the illusion of adolescence, one where the rules don't apply because no one's watching closely enough to enforce them. This is New York City, 1990s. But it's not the city of towering skylines and romantic chaos. It's the city of cracked pavement, locked apartment doors, and voices echoing through public pools and half-empty buses. It's a place where youth isn't a celebration, it's a weapon. The kids here are too young to die, too old to be saved, and too jaded to care. They drift through days like ghosts in their own skin, searching for sensation, not meaning. The story doesn't follow one character. It follows a fever. A slow, rolling tension that grows with each block walked, each drink taken, each lie told with a grin and a shrug. It begins with a boy named Telly. He has a mission, he says, to deflower virgins. That's his thing. It's not about connection or love or even conquest. It's about control. And in a world where control is rare, Telly clutches it like a prize. We watch him move through the streets with a friend, Casper, whose loose limbs and slurred speech disguise a darker current beneath. They laugh. They steal. They whisper filth like it's poetry. But there's a weight behind their movements. Something hollow. Something rotting beneath the skin. As they drift from apartment to apartment, from park to skate spot, a different story runs parallel. It's Jenny's story. She's quiet. Observant. She watches the world with eyes that don't blink often enough. After a routine HIV test, she learns something that cleaves through her like a blade. She's positive. But she's only been with one person. And that person, Telly, is still out there. Still kissing, still hunting, still pretending the world is made of rubber and smoke. That revelation shifts the film's gravity. Suddenly, every scene, every exchange, carries the pulse of impending disaster. Jenny begins searching for him. Not to punish, not even to warn, but to reach him. To find the boy who might still be saved, before he takes another girl down with him. But Telly moves fast. Faster than the truth. And the city is too big, too loud, too indifferent to slow him down. The camera doesn't judge. It doesn't cut away. It lingers. It stares. It follows the kids into spaces adults don't dare to look, into clubs where the air is thick with sweat and beer and unspoken desperation. Into bedrooms where skin becomes currency and silence becomes permission. Into corners where boys talk about girls like they're prey, and girls talk about boys like they're poison, but both keep reaching over and over, because they don't know what else to do with the loneliness. At times, it feels like a documentary. Raw. Unfiltered. But then you see the craftsmanship behind the chaos. The way the camera holds on a bruise just long enough for it to feel personal. The way laughter turns into something colder the moment it echoes. The way Jenny's footsteps sound louder than they should, like the world is asking her to run, even as she walks straight toward the worst of it. And then there's the twist, not in plot, but in tone. What begins as a day-in-the-life story about teenage rebellion slowly warps into something far more disturbing. You realize the danger isn't that these kids are reckless. It's that they're normal. They are everywhere. In every city. Every school. Every empty living room where parents work late and televisions talk louder than conversations. They aren't villains. They aren't victims. They are mirrors. And we don't like what we see. Casper, in particular, becomes a haunting presence. He stumbles, he jokes, he consumes. He is the embodiment of numbness, of what happens when you drift long enough that you forget how to feel. And in the final moments, when the night turns dark and everything falls apart, it's Casper who delivers the last blow, not with violence, but with indifference. A single choice. A single scene. And suddenly, the consequences we feared for 90 minutes crash in with surgical silence. By the time morning arrives, there is no closure. No comfort. Just another day beginning in a city that doesn't pause for the broken. A final whisper, a dazed face, a question with no answer. And that's where it ends. Not with death, but with the kind of life that feels like one. This isn't a film that wraps itself in message or resolution. It doesn't offer solutions. It doesn't scold. It simply shows. And in doing so, it creates something more powerful than shock. It creates discomfort. A discomfort that lingers. That follows you long after the credits roll. That makes you question what you missed, what you ignored, what you pretended wasn't happening just because you didn't see it directly. There are no heroes here. Just children. Trying to be something before they disappear. And in that, perhaps, lies the most terrifying truth of all. It opens with lips. Soft, searching, stumbling in the awkward rhythm of teenage intimacy. The camera doesn't flinch. It doesn't pan away or offer poetic abstraction. It stays. Watches. Two young faces, close, too close, and the boy, maybe 15, whispers lies like they're lines from scripture. "You're my first," he says, gentle as silk but cold beneath. Her eyes search his, not for truth, but for something to believe in. And she wants to believe him. Wants to feel special. Because that's what we're told this is supposed to be. First love, first touch, first time. But what happens when that illusion is weaponized? His name is Telly. Skinny, pale, with lips that never stop moving. His words drip with false tenderness, his gaze always set ahead, on the next girl, the next high, the next moment that keeps him from feeling anything real. That's the start. That's how the day begins. And it only gets darker from there. Telly pulls his shirt on, heads out into the blistering summer streets of New York City. The concrete radiates heat. Bicycles skid across sidewalks, ice cream trucks jingle like broken lullabies, and somewhere a radio bleeds static into the open air. The city feels alive, but not in a comforting way. It pulses with hunger. A kind of yearning without direction. Just motion. Endless motion. And that's where Telly lives. In the in-between spaces. In transit. From girl to girl. From lie to lie. He links up with Casper, his best friend, if that word even applies. Casper, slouched and smirking, walks like the world owes him nothing, and he's perfectly fine with that. He talks in bursts, slurs his jokes, and always seems seconds away from tipping over. Together, they move like shadows. Like stray dogs with no leash and no fear of being caught. The first stop is a drugstore. Not for medicine or gum or soda, but for theft. Candy bars, condoms, whatever can be palmed in a blink. The act is casual. Casper distracts, Telly slides, they both slip out unnoticed. It's routine. It's survival disguised as mischief. They joke about it afterward, giggling as they dodge cars and curse at pedestrians. Not because it's funny, but because laughing fills the silence. And silence means thinking. And thinking means remembering. So they don't. They roll toward a friend's place, a kind of unofficial gathering zone where the air is thick with weed smoke and the windows are covered in bedsheets instead of curtains. Boys sit sprawled across the floor, half asleep, half high, their voices rising and falling in a chorus of filth and bravado. Conversations here don't matter. They're rhythmic, not meaningful. Women as objects. Sex as conquest. Disease as a punchline. And in the center of it all is Telly, preaching like a prophet of broken morals, talking about his latest mission, how he only sleeps with virgins, how that makes it clean. Safe. No risk. But behind the bravado, there's something else. Something more dangerous. A kind of denial that's deeper than ignorance. It's willful blindness. The belief that invincibility is earned by simply pretending death doesn't exist. That as long as they don't see consequences, they don't exist. And the city lets them believe that. It's too busy to notice. Too loud to care. Meanwhile, across town, in a cold clinic painted in shades of sterile gray, a different truth begins to breathe. Jenny sits on an exam table. Quiet. Composed. Her hands folded in her lap like she's bracing for impact. She's been tested, along with her friend Ruby, as part of some vague attempt at responsibility. But Ruby's the wild one. Ruby's the one with stories and numbers and confessions whispered between giggles. Jenny has only been with one person. Telly. That fact lives in her like a shield. But when the results come back, the shield shatters. She's positive. The words hang in the air like ash. The doctor delivers them with clinical detachment. You'd think she'd just been told she has a cavity. But Jenny's eyes don't blink. Her face doesn't change. Not right away. Because the shock is too pure, too heavy. It doesn't land with a scream. It settles like lead in her bones. She was careful. She thought she was safe. But safety was never hers to claim. It was stolen the moment she believed the lie that Telly told in the dark. And now she knows what he doesn't. That he's a walking wound. An infected blade. And that every girl he touches from this point forward may inherit the same invisible sentence. Jenny doesn't run out of the clinic. She walks. Slow. Deliberate. Her mind racing, her breath shallow. The city suddenly looks different. The colors are colder. The noise is louder. She's not sure what to do. Tell him? Tell someone else? What would they even say? She starts looking for him. But finding someone like Telly in this city is like chasing smoke. He's everywhere and nowhere. Moving constantly. Shifting through apartments and corners, parks and stoops, like a shadow with a mission. Jenny asks friends. Checks clubs. Follows fragments of conversations like breadcrumbs. But always, he's just left. Just missed. Too late. Back with Telly and Casper, the day rolls on like a fever dream. They drop by a pool hall, where the air smells like beer and sweat and cheap soap. A group of teens sit sprawled across couches and cracked chairs, laughing at nothing, talking about sex like it's a game with no rules and no losers. Girls drift in and out, some younger than others, some looking for attention, some looking for escape. The boys flirt, taunt, press. There's a sense of inevitability in the room. Like everyone's dancing toward a slow collapse. Telly brags again, says he's found his next girl. Fresh, innocent, perfect. He doesn't see the irony. Doesn't feel the shadow that follows every step he takes. All he knows is the hunt. And as he speaks, the room eats it up. No one questions. No one challenges. Because if they did, they'd have to look inward. And no one here wants to see themselves clearly. Casper, on the other hand, begins to unravel. Slowly. Quietly. At first, it's just the booze. The way he slurs his speech more than usual. The way he forgets what street they're on. But then it's more. He starts pushing people. Laughing at things that aren't funny. There's a moment where he stares at himself in a mirror, and something flickers across his face, something close to recognition. But it vanishes. Buried. Drowned. Jenny, still searching, ends up at a rave. It's chaos. Lights flash. Music pulses like a heartbeat spun out of control. Sweat and perfume mix in the air. Bodies writhe. It's all color and blur. She stumbles through it, calling his name, hoping he'll appear. That somehow, through the madness, she can find him before it's too late. But he's not there. Not yet. He's already with the next girl. She's young. She trusts him. He leans in. And the door begins to close. The city doesn't stop. The sun begins to dip. The streets start to glow orange, then blue. The night waits. And with it, the consequences that have been crawling quietly behind every scene, every word, every lie. The story hasn't exploded yet. But it's about to. And no one sees it coming. Night doesn't fall in one motion. It bleeds in. Street by street, window by window, it spreads its shadow across the city, soft at first, like a sigh. The sidewalks dim. The noise doesn't die, it mutates. The laughter gets louder, more desperate. The lights get harsher. Everything feels a little more electric, a little more unsteady, like the pulse of the city has started skipping beats. And somewhere in this unfolding dusk, Jenny is still walking. Still searching. A girl alone, clutching a truth too heavy to carry, looking for someone who doesn't want to be found. She's tired. Not just in her legs, but in her soul. The city is a maze now. Familiar streets twist into strangers. The same faces reappear and vanish like ghosts. And every time she thinks she's getting close, the trail slips through her fingers. Telly, always one step ahead. Always smiling. Always lying. He's in another apartment now, already draped in the glow of television static and the haze of cheap weed. The place is cramped, sagging furniture, discarded cans, bodies draped across cushions and rugs like abandoned puppets. It's a place where nothing happens and everything happens all at once. There's no urgency, no destination. Just float, drift, burn through the hours. Telly moves through it like a prince. Jokes land easier when he tells them. Girls look a second longer. Even when he says the worst things, no one flinches. They laugh. Because that's the code in this world. Don't break the spell. Don't name the rot. Keep floating. The girl he's focused on now is young. Her name is Darcy. She's cautious, but flattered. Nervous, but drawn in. She's heard things about Telly. Everyone has. But his charm is practiced, razor sharp. He knows how to make you feel like you're the only one who matters. Even when you're just another name on a list he doesn't write down. He speaks gently. Touches gently. Every movement rehearsed, like a magician drawing the eye just far enough away from the trick. Jenny keeps moving. The rave is behind her now, the music still pulsing in her bones even though the doors have shut. She has nothing left but instinct, following whispers, hoping the city will offer her one more chance to fix what's already unraveling. She knows what will happen if she doesn't find him. She knows what he's capable of, not out of cruelty, but carelessness. He doesn't see the damage he leaves. He doesn't look back. Casper, meanwhile, is folding inward. He's never been the planner. Never the schemer. Just the passenger. The jester. But now, something's different. He's taken too much, weed, booze, who knows what else, and it's caught up to him. He stumbles through streets and stairwells, half laughing, half mumbling, chasing the tail end of a high that's already left him behind. His eyes don't focus. His feet barely hold him. He's floating too, but it's not the kind of float you come back from. Back in the apartment, the party softens into something darker. The chatter fades. The laughter goes brittle. Some people leave. Others pass out. The room becomes quieter, more intimate, like it's exhaling. And Telly sees his moment. He leads Darcy into a bedroom with the calm assurance of someone who's done it before, who believes that wanting something is the same as deserving it. The door shuts. The music outside is low now. A beat you can barely feel. Just enough to let you know time is still passing. Jenny arrives not long after. She steps into the apartment like a diver entering murky water, sensing that something has just happened. Something is happening still. The place is thick with heat and breath and staleness. A boy on the couch mumbles something incoherent. A girl slurs out a warning that no one quite hears. Jenny walks through the hallway, eyes scanning, heart sinking. She finds Casper first. He's alone in a bathroom, staring at himself in the mirror like he's forgotten who he is. There's blood on his lip from something. He doesn't know what. He sees Jenny and smiles like they're meeting at a diner, not at the edge of catastrophe. She asks where Telly is, voice barely more than a whisper. He points vaguely down the hall, then slides to the floor, already fading. She goes to the room. The door is locked. She doesn't knock. She stands there, frozen, listening to the muffled sounds, whispers, a creaking mattress, a soft gasp. It's too late. She knows it before she opens the door, before she steps back into the hallway, before she walks into the living room and sinks into a chair, staring into nothing. It's done. And what's left now? Morning. Eventually. But not yet. Casper wakes before anyone else. The room is thick with sleep and stale air. He blinks, groggy, eyes scanning the chaos. Bodies on floors. Half-empty cups. Silence. And then he sees her. Jenny. Passed out on the couch, arm draped across her stomach, hair in her face. Vulnerable. Still. He moves slowly, quietly. His steps are uneven, but deliberate. He crouches beside her, watches her for a moment. There's something unreadable in his face. Curiosity, maybe. Hunger. Loneliness. Then he leans down. What happens next is not loud. Not violent in the way movies usually are. It's worse. Because it's quiet. Because it's not interrupted. Because it feels, in that moment, like something the world has allowed. And then it's morning. The sun cuts through the blinds like judgment. Everyone's still. The party's over. Telly lies beside Darcy, smiling faintly, whispering about how much he loves virgins. He doesn't know he's infected. Doesn't know he's just passed it on. Doesn't want to know. Casper wakes again. Looks around. Sits up. The camera lingers. He says, barely above a whisper, "Jesus Christ, what happened?" And that's how it ends. With that line. That silence. That question. There is no justice. No confrontation. No redemption. Just the echo of actions that can't be undone. Just a city that will keep spinning. Just a room that will be cleaned and used again. Just kids, waking up to hangovers, walking back into daylight, not knowing how broken they are. The brilliance, no, the horror, of the ending is that it doesn't offer release. It refuses to. It leaves us exactly where we are. In the aftermath. And the silence that follows is heavier than any explosion. Telly walks like he owns every sidewalk. Not because he's powerful, not in the traditional sense, but because he believes he's untouchable. That belief is everything. It's the armor he wears more snugly than his oversized t-shirt and frayed jeans. From the moment we meet him, the illusion is already built. He speaks softly when he's with girls. Gently, coaxingly. His lies drip with practiced ease, the kind that only comes from repetition. You don't see the monster right away. You see a boy who's mastered the game, not to manipulate out of hatred, but because he's never known another way. In Telly's world, conquest is currency. But more than that, it's a way to feel alive in a city that doesn't care whether you disappear. He talks about sex with a missionary's zeal, not for connection, not even pleasure, but control. The more innocent the girl, the more power he feels. It's never stated outright, but it's there, in the quiet triumph in his eyes, in the way he retells stories to friends like he's collecting trophies. There's no violence in Telly's demeanor. No overt malice. But that's what makes him dangerous. He doesn't believe he's doing anything wrong. And when you believe that, you don't stop. Not when it's too late. Not even when someone gets hurt. That's the tragedy of him. He's a child playing at being a man, confusing dominance for adulthood. And because no one ever stopped him, no parent, no teacher, no friend, he just kept walking deeper into the rot, convinced he was right. He doesn't grow through the story. He doesn't evolve. Because this isn't his coming of age. This is the aftermath of what happens when a boy like him is left to teach himself. Casper, on the other hand, is a different kind of tragedy. He's the jester, the sidekick, the comic relief who talks too loud, drinks too much, and moves like his bones are made of rubber. But beneath the jokes and the grin is a hollow space that's far more unsettling than Telly's bravado. Casper doesn't seem to want anything. Not really. He's not chasing girls the way Telly is. He's not trying to lead or conquer. He just wants to exist inside the noise. Float in it. Stay numb. Watch him when no one else is. The way he stares at walls, the way he repeats stories like he's forgotten the point halfway through. He's not happy. He's adrift. And the danger of someone like Casper is that he doesn't realize how far he's gone until he crosses a line that can't be uncrossed. At the end of it all, it's not Telly who delivers the most devastating blow. It's Casper. The one who seemed harmless. The one who never led the pack. And that's the point. When you live in a world that doesn't ask for accountability, where silence follows every mistake, even the clown becomes a villain. Jenny is the quiet center of the storm. She doesn't take up much space, not at first. She moves carefully, speaks with caution, as if every word is being weighed before it leaves her mouth. But inside, she's burning. The moment she learns the truth, the diagnosis that no teenager should ever have to hear, her world shifts. And she doesn't scream. She doesn't rage. She sets off on a search, one foot in front of the other, holding her panic like a secret inside her chest. She is, in many ways, the only one truly awake. Everyone else is floating, skating, slipping through moments without consequence. Jenny feels it all. The gravity. The urgency. She's not trying to be a hero. She's just trying to do the right thing in a world where right and wrong have no real definition anymore. She doesn't track Telly down out of revenge. She does it because she wants to stop the bleeding, to prevent the next girl from inheriting the same silence. But she's a ghost in her own story. Every room she walks into, people look past her. She doesn't yell enough to be heard. And in a place where volume equals power, she becomes invisible. By the time she finds the party, the door's already closed. By the time she sits down, the damage is already done. That's the cruelty of her arc. Not that she fails, but that she never even had a real chance to succeed. Ruby, her friend, is the mirror image. Outspoken, loud, full of stories that teeter between exaggeration and honesty. She talks about sex like it's armor, but there's fear behind her words. She masks it with confidence, with giggles, with eye rolls. But she's terrified, of getting sick, of being seen, of being judged. When Jenny gets her results, Ruby is there, rambling in the waiting room, trying to make light of the darkness. But when she hears Jenny's news, her face shifts. For a second, all the performances drop. Because in that moment, the reality touches her. And the truth becomes more than something that happens to other people. The rest of the boys, those who orbit Telly and Casper, blend into a chorus of detachment. They pass drinks, jokes, and girls between them like shared air. They parrot each other's words, echo each other's violence. Not in fists, but in silence. in indifference, in the way they let things happen again and again without interruption. And the girls? Many of them are just as lost. Young, wide-eyed, reaching for validation in places that only take. Some are hardened. Some are hopeful. But most are just trying to belong, to find a pocket of meaning in the noise. They look to boys who don't see them. They whisper about love, even as they settle for attention. And in that, there's no judgment, only heartbreak. The city itself is a character too. It doesn't speak. It doesn't move. But it watches. From alleyways and fire escapes, from apartment windows and subway seats. It lets things happen. Not because it's cruel, but because it's tired. It's too big to care. The kids wander through it like ants in a maze, convinced they're the center of something, when really, they're just dots in the static. That's the brilliance of the character design in this story. No one is made into a monster. No one is made into a saint. They're all children, pretending to be invincible. Each one shaped by the spaces they've been allowed to fill, by the silences they've learned to survive. They are careless, not because they're evil, but because no one ever showed them how to be careful. They are cruel, not because they enjoy pain, but because they've grown used to seeing it ignored. They are not villains. They are not heroes. They are mirrors. And maybe that's the most haunting part, because the reflection they offer back is not one we want to see. But we must, because they didn't invent the world that broke them. They just grew up in it. It was never meant to happen the way it did. Not like a normal film. Not with a studio greenlight, a polished script, or big-name actors shaking hands under key lights. This wasn't a movie that crept out of Hollywood's backlit machinery. It was born on the streets. Raw. Unfiltered. Crawling its way into existence like something wild, uninvited, and undeniably alive. The director was Larry Clark, a photographer first, not a filmmaker. His work was all about the unspoken, the unguarded. Teenagers with empty gazes, bruises that spoke louder than mouths, skateboards under one arm and a cigarette in the other. He had seen something most adults missed. That youth wasn't always vibrant. Sometimes it was feral. And he didn't want to document it anymore. He wanted to show it. But where do you begin when you're trying to capture something that most people aren't even willing to admit exists? That's where Harmony Korine came in. He was only 19 when he wrote the script. A kid himself. Untrained, unpredictable, a storm of cigarette ash and manic storytelling. He wasn't interested in plot. He wasn't interested in structure. He wanted to hold a mirror to a specific type of youth, urban, unparented, unsupervised, and just let it breathe. The first draft was written in a few weeks, scribbled on napkins and scraps and in the margins of old notebooks. It didn't follow a 3-act structure. It didn't build toward a climax. It simply was. The script passed through hands like contraband. Some producers recoiled. Others leaned in. It was too much, they said. Too graphic. Too real. But that was the point. Casting the film became its own legend. Clark didn't hold traditional auditions. He walked the streets of New York, Washington Square Park, Astor Place, the Lower East Side, and just watched. Looked for the right faces. The right movements. Not actors. People. When he met Leo Fitzpatrick, who would play Telly, Leo wasn't even auditioning. He was skateboarding and cursing loudly at a friend. Clark watched him from across the street and knew he had found something. Not a performer. A presence. Chloë Sevigny wasn't an actress either. Not yet. She was a downtown it girl, a face in fashion spreads, someone with buzz and mystery. She was friends with Harmony Korine and had never acted before. But Clark saw something in her. Stillness. Sadness. Something untrained but true. When she read for Jenny, it was awkward. Her voice trembled. She looked down too much. But it worked. Because Jenny isn't supposed to be polished. She's supposed to crack. Then there was Justin Pierce, who became Casper. No one could have predicted how magnetic he would be. He wasn't just playing the part, he was the part. Wild, hilarious, self-destructive, unpredictable. Justin's real life bled into every frame. He wasn't following a script. He was channeling something deeper. The chaos. The numbness. The need to feel something, anything. Shooting began in the summer of 1994, in the blazing, sticky heat of a New York that was both decaying and alive. The production had almost no permits. Most scenes were shot guerrilla style, no crowd control, no blockades. Just a handheld camera, a boom mic tucked into a bag, and teenagers swarming the streets like they owned them. One of the strangest details? Many of the film's most iconic lines were improvised. Leo Fitzpatrick wasn't reading dialogue in those early scenes. He was just talking. Talking the way he always did. Clark encouraged it. Let the kids say what they would say. The camera could follow. When Telly brags about virgins, when Casper rants about the world, when the boys sit in a circle spewing filth, it's not scripted. It's spoken truth, caught in real time. That's why it feels so unsettling. Because you're not watching actors. You're watching people. One of the most surreal moments occurred during the skateboarding sequences. The production didn't choreograph them. They simply followed skaters as they moved through the city. One day, while filming in the park, the crew accidentally captured a real fight, a group of teens arguing over a stolen board. It erupted into punches, shouts, a pile of flailing limbs. The camera kept rolling. Clark considered using it. Not to exploit, but to show. In the end, he cut around it, but the footage exists. A fragment of reality accidentally caught on film. Another eerie fact, the HIV testing clinic Jenny visits wasn't a set. It was a functioning clinic, open for walk-ins. The people in the waiting room? Real patients. They had signed waivers, yes, but most didn't even know they'd end up in the final cut. Sevigny's performance in that scene is so subdued because she was trying to stay respectful. She was acting, but also witnessing. The lines between fiction and documentary blurred until no one could tell the difference. The party scene, raw, hot, claustrophobic, was filmed in a real apartment with real drinks, real music, and a cast that was genuinely exhausted. They filmed late into the night, over several hours, and many of the actors were actually intoxicated. Not because it was necessary, but because that's how that space would feel. They wanted the sweat to be real, the slurring to be authentic. One camera operator passed out from heat exhaustion midway through the night. He recovered. The footage stayed. Harmony Korine himself makes a blink-annual-misit cameo. He's in the background, mumbling, loitering, part of the crowd. He didn't want credit. He wanted to watch his words come to life, quietly, like a ghost passing through his own dream. Perhaps the strangest moment of all came during editing. As the footage was assembled, there was a growing realization that the film had no score. No traditional soundtrack. Just ambient sound. Street noise. Muffled hip-hop. Snatches of dialogue. Clark didn't want music to guide the viewer. He wanted the silence to do the talking. That decision unnerved test audiences. They expected cues, melodies to tell them when to feel. But real life doesn't come with a soundtrack. So neither did the film. The MPAA fought hard against its release. It received an NC-17 rating, usually a death sentence. But Clark refused to cut it. He refused to compromise. The rating stuck, but the controversy only made the film more talked about. Parents protested. Critics raged. Politicians condemned it as child pornography, even though nothing in it was illegal. It was too raw, too real. And that's what made it so important. Miramax wanted to distribute it but couldn't under the Disney umbrella. So Harvey Weinstein created a shell company, Shining Excalibur Films, just to release it. It was a workaround, but it worked. The film opened in limited release and instantly became one of the most talked-about indies of the decade. And then came the aftermath. The film made stars of its cast, but only briefly. Leo Fitzpatrick continued to act, often in smaller indie roles. Sevigny broke out into fashion and serious cinema. But Justin Pierce, the heartbreaker, the tragic clown, couldn't outrun the darkness. In 2000, at just 25, he took his own life. His death sent shockwaves through the underground film community. Those who had seen the film suddenly watched it differently. Casper wasn't just a character anymore. He was a warning, a memory, a wound. One final fact that few people know, the final line, "Jesus Christ, what happened?" wasn't in the original script. It was improvised. A last-minute choice. Casper, groggy, waking up from a blackout, surrounded by the consequences of everything that's come before. The camera lingers on his face, and that line, muttered, half lost in the air, becomes the thesis of the entire film. It's not just about kids. It's about what happens when no one's watching them. No rules. No guidance. Just drift. The strangest thing about the movie, in the end, is that it wasn't made to entertain. It was made to confront. And somehow, against all odds, it did. It slipped through the cracks of the industry, found its audience, and lodged itself in the cultural psyche like a splinter. Even now, decades later, people still whisper about it. Not because of what it shows, but because of how close it feels to real life. Too close. And that's what makes it unforgettable. It's easy to misread it on the surface. To see only the grime. To walk away from it thinking it was built purely for shock, for discomfort, for some crude voyeuristic peek into the unruly underworld of teenage chaos. And that's exactly what many did. They labeled it dangerous, depraved, irresponsible. But that reaction, visceral, defensive, immediate, wasn't just about what played out on screen. It was about what the film refused to do, explain itself. It didn't offer guidance. It didn't moralize. It didn't lead the audience by the hand and say, "Here is what you should feel." It just stared. And waited. That's what made it radical. And what makes it still burn. Critics split themselves in two when the film dropped into the cultural bloodstream in 1995. On one side were the defenders, the voices who recognized what it truly was, not a celebration of destruction, but a mirror held up to it. On the other were those who couldn't get past the surface, the bodies, the language, the young faces pushed into spaces they weren't supposed to inhabit. But both sides had something in common. No one walked away from it untouched. At the center of all this is a single idea. What does it mean to grow up when no one is watching? The film never articulates this question outright, but it pulses through every moment. From the opening kiss that masquerades as intimacy to the final act of violation that lands in silence, it captures a world where youth is both sacred and completely discarded. It isn't just the absence of parents or structure, it's the absence of consequence. The absence of awareness. One of the most critically dissected scenes is the conversation among the boys in the apartment, the one where they lounge, smoke, and talk about girls in crude, unfiltered language. Critics at the time were appalled. Not necessarily because of the vulgarity, but because of how casual it all felt. There was no tension, no awareness. Just boys talking like boys, while the camera stayed still, almost indifferent. But that was the point. By not interrupting the moment, by not dressing it up or condemning it, the film forced the audience to sit in it. And that discomfort was essential. Because in real life, these conversations happen. Unchecked, unchallenged. And what follows them can ripple through entire lives. The scene wasn't gratuitous. It was a reconstruction of complicity, and it dared the viewer to ask why it felt so familiar. The film's depiction of gender dynamics also struck a raw nerve. The boys move through the city with entitlement. Telly hunts virgins not just as a preference, but as a method of self-preservation. He believes purity equals safety. But in that belief lies the rot. He reduces the girls to stages in his own journey. He doesn't wonder what they feel. He doesn't see them. And worse, the world around him doesn't correct him. Not his friends. Not the institutions. Not the culture. On the other side, the girls exist in shadows. Jenny is the most direct contrast. Quiet, gentle, and yet so much more emotionally alive than any of the boys. Her journey isn't about sex or rebellion. It's about urgency. About trying to stop something irreversible. But what makes her arc devastating is that she plays by the rules. She gets tested, tells the truth, seeks help, and still fails. From a critical lens, her story becomes a symbol of the failure of responsibility. She represents the very thing society asks of young people: responsibility, self-awareness, a willingness to confront danger. And yet, her voice is the one that gets ignored. By the time she reaches Telly, she's already too late. The film doesn't offer her a moment of triumph. Just silence. Because sometimes, doing everything right still isn't enough. Then there's Casper. His character has become a kind of litmus test for how viewers engage with the film's darker truths. He's funny. Charismatic. The clown. The kid you root for despite knowing you shouldn't. But his arc is perhaps the most horrifying. Because it embodies the core tragedy of passive cruelty. Casper doesn't orchestrate harm. He absorbs it. And then, he repeats it. The final scene, where he assaults a drugged Jenny in her sleep, lands like a hammer. It's not graphic. It's not dramatized. It's quiet. Which makes it unbearable. The camera doesn't cut away. It doesn't scream. It just watches. And by doing so, it refuses to let the audience pretend it didn't happen. That single moment sparked one of the fiercest critical debates in film history. Was it necessary? Was it too much? Was it exploitative? But the truth is, it was the logical conclusion of everything that came before. It was the final ripple in a culture that taught boys they were owed something, and girls that they should keep quiet. Casper wasn't an anomaly. He was a product. And by ending on that note, with that question, Jesus Christ, what happened? The film turns its eyes on the viewer. Because that's not a line meant for the characters. It's a line meant for us. The film's critics often pointed to the young cast and the raw nature of the content as crossing ethical lines. And yes, the performances feel disturbingly real. That's because, in many cases, they were. These weren't trained actors. These were real teenagers, living in the same streets they filmed on, echoing the same fears and detachment that the story explored. Some of the boys in the film were actually homeless. Some had been arrested. Some never acted again. But that's part of the film's legacy. It blurred the line between fiction and documentary so seamlessly that critics didn't know where to place it. It wasn't neat. It wasn't safe. And most importantly, it wasn't designed to entertain. It was designed to expose. And that exposure touched everything. Public school systems. Urban outreach programs. HIV prevention campaigns. The film was used in classrooms. Banned from others. Politicians condemned it. Parents feared it. But teenagers? Teenagers understood it. They recognized the spaces. The language. The boredom that hides behind bravado. For them, it wasn't sensational. It was familiar. That's where the film found its deepest resonance, not in critics' columns, but in whispered conversations among kids who saw themselves in it. Thematically, it drips with decay. Not just physical, but emotional, moral, institutional. The city itself is a metaphor, a vast, indifferent organism that swallows these kids without blinking. Adults are absent not just physically, but spiritually. There are no mentors, no boundaries, just wandering. The idea that these children are the byproducts of abandonment isn't just implied, it's screamed in silence. And yet, the film never turns them into villains. That's the uncomfortable truth that critics eventually had to face. Telly isn't a monster. He's a boy. Casper isn't evil. He's broken. Jenny isn't a martyr. She's scared. They all are. And that's what makes the events so difficult to watch. Because if they were caricatures, the pain wouldn't feel real. But because they're flesh, it leaves bruises. In later years, the film's critical reception softened. It began appearing on lists of essential independent films. It was studied in film schools, analyzed not just for its subject matter, but for its construction, its use of ambient sound, its refusal to follow narrative tropes, its devastating commitment to naturalism. What once seemed like chaos revealed itself to be intentional discomfort. Larry Clark wasn't trying to make a point. He was trying to make you look. The dialogue, too, was often made up on the spot. Yes, there was a script, but Larry encouraged improvisation. If a line didn't feel natural, the actors were told to change it, to speak how they really would. That's why the conversations feel so uncomfortable. They weren't cleaned up. They weren't filtered for content. The boys said what real boys would say when no one else was listening. Even the music followed this philosophy. Instead of a sweeping score or curated soundtrack, the film leans into diegetic sound. Songs from radios. Skaters blasting tapes. Ambient street noise. There's a rawness to it. Nothing cues you how to feel. You're left alone in the moment, deciding for yourself whether to cry, cringe, or look away. One particularly surreal moment came during filming at a real HIV clinic. Chloe's character receives her diagnosis in a stark, clinical room. What many viewers don't know is that the room wasn't a set, it was an actual clinic. The people in the waiting room were real patients. The weight in the air wasn't fiction. Chloe later admitted she was shaken by how real it felt. She didn't have to act the stillness. It was already in the room. Because the production operated without many traditional structures, the set often felt like an extension of the streets. There were no trailers, no fancy craft services. Meals came from corner delis. Breaks were taken on stoops. The cast would skate between setups, sometimes getting bruised before takes. One afternoon, Justin Pierce showed up with a black eye from a real fight. Instead of rescheduling, Clark adjusted the scene. Casper would have a black eye, he said. And so he did. The party scenes were perhaps the most difficult to film, not because of logistics, but because of energy. They needed to feel wild, reckless, real. To get that, they let the cast truly party. Drinks flowed. Music blasted. The camera moved through the chaos like a ghost, capturing fragments. Most of the extras were friends of the cast, kids from the neighborhood, real skaters, artists, runaways. At one point, they lost track of how many people were in the apartment. One crew member later joked, it was less like filming and more like surviving. Despite the roughness, the shoot was deeply collaborative. Larry Clark wasn't a dictator. He listened, asked questions, let the kids shape the narrative. That openness is part of why the film feels so lived in. It wasn't made about them. It was made with them. That difference can be felt in every frame. After filming wrapped, editing became its own challenge. Clark had hours of footage. Some scenes had 3, 4, 5 takes with completely different dialogue. Finding the spine of the film meant listening for rhythm, not plot. The editor worked closely with Clark, shaping the film not through traditional beats, but emotional ones. Where did it feel like something broke? Where did silence say more than dialogue? The premiere was electric. No one knew what to expect. When the first screening ended, the audience sat in stunned silence. Some clapped. Others walked out. A few critics wept. But no one was unmoved. That was the power of the process. A film made on a shoestring, with no stars and no rules, had landed like a lightning bolt in the cultural consciousness. And then, the backlash. Articles accused the film of exploitation. Politicians called for bans. Schools prohibited discussions. But behind the noise, something else grew: respect. The authenticity was undeniable. The performances were too real. The film became a reference point for indie filmmaking. A blueprint for how to capture something unfiltered. In the years since, the stories have only grown more legendary. Leo Fitzpatrick has spoken about how he didn't realize the gravity of what they were making until years later. Chloë Sevigny went on to build a career defined by risk-taking and nuance. But for Justin Pierce, the line between film and life was harder to manage. He struggled. And in 2000, he was gone. His death cast a long, heavy shadow. Suddenly, the performance that had once felt charismatic now felt tragic. You watch him now, and you don't see Casper. You see Justin. Laughing. Lost. Burning too bright. Looking back, it's hard to believe the film even got made. Everything about its production defied the rules. And yet, that's what made it unforgettable. It wasn't controlled. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't supposed to be. It was rough, bruised, brave. A film made in the wild, about the wild. And maybe that's the fun fact no one wants to say out loud. That the reason the movie worked so well was because it wasn't trying to be a movie at all. It begins with a city, not the postcard version, not the skyline that glows gold during magic hour or the cobblestone charm that tourists carry home in photos. This is New York, stripped of polish. Grit under fingernails, heat rising from concrete, alleys that don't echo but swallow sound. The film lives here, moves here, breathes this version of the city with every unflinching shot. Because in this story, the setting doesn't just hold the characters, it creates them. The film never tells you where you are with titles or transitions. It doesn't need to. You feel it. In the chipped paint of apartment walls. In the flicker of faulty fluorescence above corner bodega counters. In the blur of bodies pushing through crowded sidewalks where no one says "excuse me." It's an environment that is always moving, always shifting, and always indifferent. There's no romantic gaze here. Only reality. Raw and loud and sometimes quiet in all the wrong ways. Take the opening sequence. A teenage boy and girl in a bedroom, sunlight bleeding through the slats of dusty blinds. There's no music. No warm filter. Just the hum of a distant television and the quiet horror of what's actually happening. The room is cramped, cluttered, ordinary. And that's what makes it devastating. Because it's not some imagined space. It's real. Lived in. It could be anywhere. And for the rest of the film, that same unnerving sense of this could be down the street never leaves. Throughout the film, the camera moves through the city with a kind of ghost-like intimacy. It follows kids through hallways, behind dumpsters, into public parks and overcrowded apartments. It never hurries. It never cuts away for drama's sake. Instead, it lingers, watches, observes. Cinematographer Eric Edwards didn't shoot this film like a drama or a documentary. He shot it like a confession. The camera stays low, often at eye level with the kids, making the viewer feel as though they're part of the group, whether they want to be or not. Every location matters. A cramped apartment becomes a makeshift headquarters for teenage boys, a place where language curdles and misogyny is mistaken for camaraderie. The kitchen sink drips. The floorboards creak. Light filters in through a sheet instead of a curtain. There's no decoration, only function. A couch. A television. An ashtray overflowing. The space isn't just background, it's narrative. It tells you who these boys are before they ever open their mouths. There's no adult presence. No order. Just entropy, hiding in the scent of stale beer and old sweat. Then there's the public park. Wide open, filled with green, but somehow still suffocating. The boys skate across concrete with manic energy, shouting, falling, laughing. But the camera never pulls back to marvel at the freedom. Instead, it sticks close. Every scrape against pavement sounds too loud. Every cheer feels too sharp. Because freedom here isn't liberation, it's abandonment. The park isn't a playground. It's a holding cell for boys who have nowhere else to be. In contrast, the HIV clinic where Jenny receives her diagnosis is all cold sterility. Pale green walls. Chrome fixtures. The fluorescent lighting doesn't illuminate, it interrogates. The camera hangs on her face, still and unmoving, while the quiet becomes unbearable. This setting isn't meant to be cinematic. It's meant to sting. To drag the viewer into the realization that the city, which was once full of motion, has now collapsed into stillness. The chaos stops, but the dread begins. The party scenes, humid, claustrophobic, pulsing, are another environment entirely. These rooms feel alive. Not joyful. Just alive. Packed bodies. Thin air. Furniture shoved against walls. The lens swims through the sweat and music, half-dazed. Colors blur. Faces smear. It's not a celebration. It's a slow descent. And the cinematography captures that perfectly. Not with hyper-stylized shots or choreographed chaos, but with a handheld drift that mimics the disorientation of being in a space that's just one wrong decision away from disaster. Lighting plays a crucial role in shaping tone. There's no glamour lighting here. Shadows fall hard. Faces disappear into dimness. Much of the film takes place in that liminal zone between day and night, when the city starts to buzz in a darker key. Street lamps flicker. Fluorescents hum. Car headlights stutter across dirty glass. The light in this film isn't used to highlight beauty. It's used to expose, to scrape away comfort and leave behind truth. Even the club Jenny visits during her search for Telly becomes its own character. Bathed in strobing reds and sickly blues, it's a place of sensory overload. But the music isn't cathartic. It's oppressive. The colors don't soothe, they saturate, until faces blur into shapes and limbs blur into gestures. She moves through the crowd not as a participant, but as a witness. This setting becomes a manifestation of her panic. A maze with no exit. The club isn't shot as a place of liberation. It's a trap. Sound design is equally important. The film doesn't rely on a traditional score to dictate emotion. Instead, it immerses you in the ambient textures of the city. Skateboards rolling across uneven pavement. Distant sirens. Arguments through paper-thin walls. Laughter that turns sinister as it echoes down subway corridors. Silence that feels like a warning instead of a reprieve. Even the moments of music, blaring from radios, rattling out of boomboxes, aren't comforting. They're background noise. The soundtrack of youth trying to drown itself out. Eric Edwards' cinematography avoids glamour at every turn. He shoots close. Real. Often handheld. He lets shots breathe even when you wish they'd cut away. That choice, of proximity, of restraint, forces the audience into uncomfortable intimacy. When Telly speaks in his soft, manipulative tone, the camera doesn't retreat. It gets closer. You see the pores on his face. The slight twitch in his smile. It's not about spectacle. It's about exposure. And then there's the use of color, or rather, the lack of it. The film leans into neutral, often washed-out palettes. Muted grays, browns, yellows. Skin under dirty light. Walls painted in long-forgotten pastels. The visual world feels like it's been sun-bleached and worn down. Like even the settings themselves are exhausted. Occasionally, a pop of color sneaks in, a red shirt, a blue wall, but it doesn't refresh. It disrupts. Like a bruise on pale skin. Movement within the frame is loose, unchoreographed. The camera follows conversations like an eavesdropper. Characters talk over each other. The framing is sometimes imperfect, but that imperfection works. It lends the film a documentary realism that hits harder than any polished aesthetic could. When Jenny runs down a street, trying to find Telly, the camera chases her, not gracefully, but breathlessly. The city becomes a blur. Her panic becomes ours. No setting in the film feels designed. That's the genius of it. Everything feels found. The rooms are messy in the way real rooms are messy. Cups half full, socks on the floor, posters curling off the wall. The parks aren't scenic, they're functional, filled with kids loitering not because they want to be there, but because there's nowhere else to go. The subways are grimy, lit like interrogation rooms, filled with anonymous faces that never look twice at the kids drifting past. Even the transitions feel organic. There's no fade to black. No musical cues. Scenes end when they want to. Sometimes in the middle of a thought. Sometimes on a look. It mirrors the way memory works, fragmented, non-linear, heavy in some places and weightless in others. The viewer doesn't get to exhale. The city doesn't let you. By the time the film reaches its final scene, a party winding down, bodies passed out across every surface, the sun starting to leak through the blinds, the setting has become almost abstract. The air feels heavy. The light feels wrong. It's morning, but it doesn't feel like salvation. It feels like aftermath. Like waking up inside a decision you can't undo. That bedroom, where it all ends, is shot with a kind of funeral calm. The camera doesn't move. It watches. Casper wakes up. Looks around. The light is too bright now. The room too quiet. He mutters, "Jesus Christ, what happened?" And we know the question isn't just about the night. It's about everything. Because the setting never let up. It surrounded the characters. Raised them. Swallowed them. And in the end, it didn't save them. The city is still there. The rooms are still full. The lights still flicker. And the camera fades, not on resolution, but on reality. Unfiltered. Unforgiving. Undeniably alive. It wasn't your typical film set. There were no trailers, no makeup vans, no slick walkie-talkie chatter echoing across a locked-down street. There was just a handful of crew, a few bags of equipment, and a city that didn't care what they were doing. The production of Kids in 1994 unfolded not like a movie being made, but like a group of friends chasing a half-formed dream through the blistering summer heat of downtown Manhattan. And behind that raw, bruised aesthetic was a crew trying to turn a feral, uncontainable vision into something that could sit inside a projector and haunt the world. From the beginning, director Larry Clark had one unshakable vision: authenticity at all costs. He didn't want actors. He wanted truth. He didn't want rehearsals. He wanted reality. So he built a world around those intentions, and what followed was one of the strangest and most intimate behind-the-scenes dynamics in indie film history. One of the first things Clark did was throw out the conventional idea of a cast list. There were no agents involved, no studio-signed contracts pushing big names. He literally walked the streets. He watched skaters rip down sidewalks. He sat in Washington Square Park, staring at teenagers sprawled on benches, listening. And when he found someone who felt like a character, he approached them directly. That's how he found Leo Fitzpatrick. Leo wasn't trying to be discovered. Leo wasn't trying to be discovered. He was just skating, chain-smoking, yelling at his board. He had the kind of face that looked permanently tired, permanently over it. Clark approached him like a recruiter. No script, no promises, just an invitation to be part of something that hadn't been done before. Leo said yes without really understanding what it was. "I figured it would be fun," he later said. "I didn't know I'd end up as Telly." Filming with Leo wasn't about getting the performance right. It was about letting him be who he already was, and Clark just happened to be pointing a camera at it. Leo improvised most of his scenes, playing off the energy around him. When the camera caught him delivering monologues about girls and sex, those weren't memorized lines. They were spoken in real time, a mix of bravado and brokenness that he didn't even know was affecting people until after the film came out. Justin Pierce, who played Casper, was the unpredictable one. Funny, charming, wild, he bounced around set like he was made of rubber. He kept things loose. When scenes dragged or tension built up, Justin would pull pranks or start freestyle raps. He once tried to skateboard down a staircase between takes, wiped out, and bounced up laughing with blood on his elbow. "It's just skin," he grinned. "Let's keep rolling." And they did. Justin and Leo became close friends on and off the set. Their chemistry wasn't manufactured, it was real. They talked like brothers, finished each other's sentences, and often wandered off between takes, leaving the crew to search for them when it was time to shoot. Sometimes, the crew would simply follow them and start rolling again. There's a scene in the film where they walk through the city, making crude jokes, stealing food, and causing general chaos. That wasn't rehearsed. It was just them. Clark followed with the camera and let the city fill in the rest. Chloë Sevigny's experience was different. She wasn't part of the group initially. She had done some modeling, was friends with Korine, and ended up being cast almost by accident. She was meant to play a smaller role, but Clark saw something in her. A stillness. A depth. She wasn't flashy, but she watched. And that made her the perfect Jenny. She spent most of her time observing, not just in character, but on set. She kept a journal during the shoot. Notes on the scenes. Notes on the people. Chloë was quiet, but everyone listened when she spoke. Her presence changed the tone of the film. Around the boys, the energy was chaos. With her, it slowed, deepened. On set, she had a calming effect. She encouraged the younger girls in the cast, helped with costumes, and even offered to help the crew carry gear between locations. There was no diva behavior, just dedication. Korine, the screenwriter, was like a ghost in the background. He was always around but rarely predictable. He drifted in and out of scenes, sometimes giving direction, sometimes just watching. He was as unpolished as his script, full of wild ideas, half-finished jokes, and sudden bursts of philosophical insight. The crew would often find him scribbling notes on napkins or tearing pages from magazines and pinning them to the wall as inspiration. He once showed up on set with a bag full of wigs and hats, claiming he was going to blend into the background like a weirdo. And he did. He appears in the film, briefly, as one of the partygoers. He didn't care about credit. He just wanted to be in it. To breathe the air of the world he'd written. Shooting without permits led to some unpredictable moments. During a scene in Washington Square Park, a real cop tried to break up the gathering of skaters, not realizing a movie was being filmed. Clark had to explain, quickly and quietly, that they weren't causing trouble, just making art. The cop shrugged and walked away, but not before asking for the title. "Kids," Clark told him. The officer laughed and muttered, "Figures." The most tense behind-the-scenes moment came during one of the party scenes. The apartment was cramped, hot, and packed with over 30 people, mostly non-actors. Real kids, real teens. The alcohol was real too, and as the night dragged on, the line between acting and reality blurred. One of the extras started a fight. A lamp was broken. Clark stepped in, calmed everyone down, and quietly removed the aggressor from the apartment. They didn't reshoot. They didn't need to. The chaos they'd captured was enough. Cinematographer Eric Edwards operated the camera himself in many scenes. He didn't use cranes or tracks, just his body. He'd crouch in corners, follow characters down alleys, squeeze into subway cars. His goal was to make the camera invisible, to become part of the environment. That technique made the actors forget they were being filmed, and it made the footage breathe. One of his most challenging scenes to shoot was Jenny's walk through the city after her diagnosis. There was no crew following her, just Edwards with a handheld camera, walking 20 feet behind. The sounds were real: cars honking, strangers yelling, subways rumbling beneath their feet. It took hours to get the right take. Not because Chloë messed up, but because they were waiting for the city to cooperate. When it finally did, when the light was just right and the noise dipped for a moment, they caught a take that felt like silence swallowing the world. Despite the heavy subject matter, there was laughter on set. A lot of it. The cast cracked jokes constantly. During a break in filming, Justin convinced everyone to try balancing beer cans on their heads. He could hold one for nearly a minute. Leo couldn't last 5 seconds. They made bets on it. Harmony lost $10. Later, during a night shoot, Chloë read tarot cards for the cast. She drew the Tower for Justin. He laughed. "That's the one that means everything falls apart, right?" She smiled, half joking. "Only if you're not ready." The editing process took longer than expected. Clark sat with the editor, balancing hours of raw footage, most of it unscripted. Some scenes had no clear start or end. Others were interrupted by real-life events: sirens, neighbors yelling, strangers walking into frame. They cut carefully, not to clean things up, but to preserve the feeling. Every transition was a decision. Every silence was chosen. By the time the film was ready, there were no guarantees. They had a finished product. But who would show it? Who would risk it? Miramax agreed, but not publicly. The film's content was too raw, too real. So Harvey Weinstein created a shell label to distribute it: Shining Excalibur Films. That way, the film could hit theaters without Disney, Miramax's parent company, taking the heat. It was a gamble. But it worked. When the film finally premiered at Sundance, the room went quiet. Not just respectful quiet, haunted quiet. People didn't know how to react. Some stood and applauded. Others sat frozen. One critic said it felt like someone had poured gasoline over the screen and lit a match. The aftershocks lasted for years. And as for the cast, none of them expected what came next. Chloë Sevigny went on to become one of the most daring actors of her generation. Leo Fitzpatrick worked steadily in TV and film. Harmony Korine would go on to direct cult classics of his own. But Justin Pierce, his light burned too fast. He couldn't escape the shadow of Casper. Couldn't outrun the sadness. In 2000, he was gone. That loss still echoes. And it makes the behind-the-scenes memories feel sacred. Bittersweet. A snapshot of youth on the edge. A summer project that turned into a time capsule of a culture too often ignored. They didn't have millions. They didn't have a roadmap. They just had each other, a camera, and a city that never stopped moving. And from that chaos, they created something unforgettable. It starts with a kiss. Not a romantic kiss, not one lit by moonlight or underscored with strings. It's a kiss soaked in deceit, shaped by manipulation, delivered through the soft voice of a teenage boy who knows exactly how to lie and who to lie to. That kiss, awkward, quiet, and coated in the illusion of intimacy, is the match strike. The moment where everything starts unraveling. Because in this film, the smallest actions carry the weight of worlds. And nothing is what it seems. On its surface, the story drifts like a lazy summer day. Boys skate through the cracked bones of a restless city. Girls sit in corners, whispering truths that don't reach far enough. People laugh, party, collapse into couches like they're too tired to care. But underneath it all, something else pulses. An ache. a fear. A quiet scream buried under the noise. The film doesn't say it out loud, but everything about it is haunted by a single question. What happens when no one protects the young? That's where the first and most obvious theme emerges: neglect. Not in the sensational way, not with visible bruises or courtroom scenes. This is a quieter form. Emotional neglect. Institutional neglect. Cultural neglect. The kind that lets kids raise themselves, lets misinformation become gospel, and leaves rooms full of teenagers pretending they know what it means to love, to hurt, to survive. The adults are gone, not just off-screen, but off-world. They aren't present. They aren't guiding. They're forgotten. Or worse, they've forgotten them. Telly is the product of that void. He moves with swagger, with certainty, with a language built entirely from bravado. But he's not evil. He's unaware. That's the horror. He genuinely believes in his methods. He thinks sex with virgins protects him. He thinks love is persuasion. He doesn't see harm, because no one ever showed him what it looked like. He's a symptom, not a villain. And that's what makes him dangerous. He's a boy who never learned to see beyond himself. Casper, by contrast, is the embodiment of nihilism. He doesn't chase power. He doesn't try to dominate. He floats, numbs, makes jokes, disappears into clouds of smoke and cans of beer. He is the bystander who never steps in, the friend who laughs at cruelty, the one who becomes the monster not by planning it, but by not feeling it. He exists in a world where consequences are whispered, if mentioned at all, where people do things because they can, because they're bored, because it doesn't seem to matter. And so we watch as characters sink into that moral fog, not with dramatic plunges, but slow, incremental slips. That's another theme: moral erosion. The line between right and wrong isn't crossed in a single act, it dissolves, disappears. One lie leads to another. One justification bleeds into silence. One act of denial leads to a girl like Jenny sitting alone in a clinic, staring at a diagnosis that she never imagined could belong to her. Jenny is the film's moral compass, but not in the way we usually imagine one. She doesn't lecture. She doesn't scream. She feels. Her fear, her confusion, her heartbreak, these are the things that tether the film to any semblance of hope. She tries to fix what she didn't break. Tries to stop a boy who doesn't want to be stopped. And in doing so, she becomes the embodiment of another, deeper theme. Powerlessness. It runs through every frame. These kids don't make choices so much as they react to the chaos around them. They're pushed by instinct, by peer pressure, by fear of being left out. No one seems to know how to say no. Or if they do, no one knows how to make it stick. That absence of power, of agency, isn't just a theme, it's the structure of the story. We are meant to feel as helpless as they are. We are meant to yell at the screen and know it won't change a thing. And then there's disease. HIV looms over this film not like a monster in the closet, but like a fog, present, invisible, deadly. It moves quietly, like a rumor, passed from mouth to mouth, hand to body, act to act. The virus itself becomes a symbol, not just of danger, but of ignorance. Because that's the real killer here, not just the disease, but the failure to understand it, to respect it, to believe it's real. Jenny knows it's real, and that knowledge isolates her. In a world where ignorance is armor, truth becomes a burden. Her journey through the city becomes a metaphorical descent, a kind of pilgrimage to find meaning or redemption, or maybe just someone who will listen. But every door she opens is already closing. Every place she turns, Telly has already vanished. And with each missed opportunity, the weight of inevitability grows. Inevitability. Yes, that's another theme. The film doesn't build toward salvation. It builds toward impact. A slow, creeping awareness that no one is coming to save anyone. That actions have already been taken. That harm is already spreading. That the clock is already ticking. When Jenny finally finds Telly, it's too late. When she sits down at the party, it's over. The film ends not with a climax, but with acceptance. And that's the cruelest cut of all. Symbolism in the film is rarely overt. New York isn't shot like a city of opportunity. It's shot like a jungle, a maze, a place that swallows people. The skate parks, the stairwells, the alleys, each one is a stage for misdirection, for hiding, for slipping through cracks. The apartments tell their own stories. Rooms where kids pile up, where beds are shared, where privacy doesn't exist. These aren't homes. They're holding pens. Places to crash. To get high. To pass out. The idea of safety is absent. And without safety, how can there be trust? Even light becomes symbolic. The film avoids beauty. It leans into the unflattering. Fluorescent bulbs. Dirty windows. Shadows where things go unseen. And when light does fall in a gentle way, like when Jenny walks the streets alone, it feels like an interrogation. Like the world is watching her crumble and doing nothing about it. Perhaps the most haunting symbol is the mirror. Casper stares into one near the end. His face, smeared, tired, lost. There's no epiphany. No shift. Just a boy looking at his own reflection and seeing nothing. It's a moment that echoes louder than any monologue. Because in that silence is the answer to everything. No one taught them how to see themselves. The final line, delivered in a daze, Jesus Christ, what happened? Isn't just Casper's reckoning. It's ours. It's the audience's. It's the filmmakers'. It's the world's. That one line becomes a scream trapped inside a whisper. A reflection of a generation stumbling through darkness with no light and no map. But amid all this despair, there's something else. Something harder to name. Yearning. For love. For connection. For meaning. Even the worst characters aren't monsters. They're hungry. Hungry for touch, for purpose, for safety. Telly seeks control because he has none. Casper numbs himself because feeling anything might shatter him. Jenny chases Telly not out of anger, but out of a desperate hope that maybe she can fix just one thing. And in that way, the film isn't just about youth falling apart. It's about youth reaching for something it was never given. There's no villain. There's no hero. Only kids. Some trying to feel. Some trying to disappear. Some trying to pretend the world hasn't already ended. That's the deepest, quietest theme of all. Denial. Not just the characters' denial, but the culture's. The world in which they live refuses to look closely. Refuses to intervene. Refuses to educate. And when you turn away from the vulnerable long enough, they learn to turn away from themselves. The film never screams its themes. It whispers them. In the way Jenny stares through bus windows. In the way Telly smirks after lying. In the way Casper stumbles through the morning light, unaware of the weight he now carries. It's a film built from shadows. And in those shadows, everything lives. Fear. Desire. Regret. Silence. A generation left to raise itself. A truth too heavy for youth to carry alone. And a question that never stops echoing. What do we become when no one shows us how to be human? It begins with a camera that doesn't blink. No sweeping crane shots, no slow-motion flourishes, no digital choreography to dazzle the eye. This was not a film made to impress. It was made to witness. From the very first frame, it's clear that what you're watching is not built from the language of cinema as most know it. It's something more primal. More dangerous. The camera here doesn't glide. It follows. It lurks. It breathes. Larry Clark, stepping behind the camera for the first time as a filmmaker, brought with him a photographer's gaze, one honed over decades capturing the intimacy of youth in still images. His earlier work, especially in his photo book Tulsa, had already mapped out a visual grammar of vulnerability. So when he began building this film, he didn't want spectacle. He wanted honesty. He didn't want to tell a story. He wanted to show what it felt like to live inside one that had already lost its structure. That intention shaped every technical decision made during production. It meant working with a cinematographer who understood that light should expose, not flatter. Enter Eric Allen Edwards, whose eye for naturalistic detail became the film's heartbeat. Together, they decided to shoot largely handheld, using 16mm film to maintain a raw, grainy texture. That choice alone stripped the movie of polish. Every frame felt rough, alive, unclean, like something you weren't supposed to be watching. The handheld camera was never still. It trailed behind characters like a curious spirit, swaying slightly with every footstep, breathing with every exhale. This wasn't a camera on rails. This was a presence. Sometimes it hovered too close, making you feel trapped in someone's skin. Sometimes it lingered just far enough away to remind you of the distance between people, even in the most intimate of moments. Lighting was mostly available light, whatever they could find in the environment. That wasn't just a budgetary constraint, it was a philosophical one. Clark wanted the film to look exactly how New York looked when you stepped outside your apartment in the middle of July. Dim. Overexposed in patches. Drained of color in others. Rooms were lit by broken lamps, overhead fluorescence, streetlight spill, and, often, nothing at all. The shadows became characters. The darkness didn't hide monsters. It just was another part of the world these kids moved through without questioning. But one of the film's most distinctive tools was its editing, or lack thereof. There's a rhythm to the film, but it doesn't follow traditional pacing. Scenes unfold with a kind of languid inertia, almost like memories dredged up in real time. Moments stretch longer than you expect them to. Conversations go on past their emotional peak. Arguments don't resolve, they dissipate. That's not sloppy storytelling. That's intentional discomfort. The editor, Christopher Tellefson, worked closely with Clark to preserve the story's unvarnished feel. Instead of cutting for drama or tempo, they cut for truth. If a kid stumbled over his words, they left it in. If someone looked into the camera, they kept it. These imperfections weren't flaws. They were proof. Proof that the world on screen was real, or as close to real as fiction can ever hope to get. Some of the most unsettling scenes were edited to withhold relief. Take the party scene at the end. The room is sweltering, bodies splayed across couches and floors, the air thick with smoke and heat. The editing doesn't move quickly through this chaos. It doesn't cut to give you perspective. It sits in it. You feel the claustrophobia, the aimlessness, the slow descent into something that has no name but leaves a scar anyway. In interviews after the film's release, Justin talked about how surreal it all felt. "I didn't think it'd blow up," he admitted. "We were just making this movie with our friends, you know? I didn't think I'd be walking red carpets or doing interviews or any of that." Fame didn't sit easily on him. And in 2000, 5 years after the film's release, Justin took his own life in a hotel room in Las Vegas. He was 25. His death cast a long, inescapable shadow over the film. Watching it now, it's impossible not to see the fragility in his performance. The ache behind the laughter. The way he fades in and out of rooms like someone already slipping away. And then there was Chloë Sevigny. She wasn't part of the original group. She was orbiting it, already a New York icon, with her unique blend of street cool and indie charm. Harmony Korine, the film's writer and her then-boyfriend, brought her in. She was supposed to have a minor role, but Clark saw something more. A gravity. A depth. He made her Jenny, and the entire emotional balance of the film shifted. Chloë didn't act so much as absorb. Her performance is marked by silence, stillness, glances that last half a second too long. She doesn't scream. She sinks. And that quiet descent, into knowledge, into fear, into a truth no one else will face, became the soul of the story. She's spoken often about how difficult the shoot was. "There were no boundaries," she said once. "We were kids ourselves. We didn't really know what we were doing. And the film didn't protect us." But she also stands by the experience. "It opened everything for me. It was dangerous, but it was real." That realness carried her into a career defined by bold choices, by fearless performances. But she's never really left kids. It still follows her. Fans quoting her lines, critics referencing her breakout, interviewers asking if she ever looks back. "Of course I do," she says. "How could I not? It was the beginning of everything." Rosario Dawson's story is another kind of origin myth. She was literally sitting on her stoop when Korine spotted her. He walked over, started talking, and a few conversations later, she was cast. No acting background. No agent. Just presence. And on screen, she radiates it: confidence, charisma, edge. Ruby, her character, is the fire to Jenny's water. Loud, defiant, layered with masks. She talks big but listens closely. She moves through the film like someone daring the world to look at her, then punishing them when they do. Rosario has since become one of the most successful actors from the cast, but she's never forgotten where it started. "That film was everything," she said in a retrospective interview. "It showed me that stories didn't have to be pretty. They just had to be honest." The rest of the cast, many of them unknown, many never to act again, filled the world of the film with texture. Faces that didn't look cast. Voices that didn't sound rehearsed. They were friends. Roommates. Skate crew regulars. And that familiarity translated on screen. The chemistry wasn't built, it existed. The tension wasn't acted, it was lived. But while the cast was navigating sudden attention, the world outside was reeling. When the film premiered, reactions were explosive. Critics were split. Parents were horrified. Politicians called for censorship. But the audience, especially young people, leaned in. They saw themselves. Or their friends. Or the parts of their lives that adults refused to acknowledge. One audience member at Sundance said, "It felt like someone had turned a camera on my block and just let it roll." Teenagers showed up in droves. Not because the film was sexy or shocking, but because it was honest. It captured the boredom, the recklessness, the sadness of being young in a world that doesn't see you. It didn't preach. It didn't fix. It just watched. And that watching gave people permission to feel seen. Audience reviews, especially in the early days, were like confessionals. Some praised the film's bravery. Others admitted it made them uncomfortable in ways they couldn't explain. A few called it exploitative. But even those critics often circled back to one undeniable truth. It stayed with them. Long after the credits rolled. Long after the headlines faded. Years later, new generations continue to discover the film. They stream it, share it, argue about it. Is it a masterpiece? Is it dangerous? Is it both? The answer is yes. Because what the cast created, intentionally or not, was something beyond film. It was a time capsule. A warning. A wound. And they did it without scripts in their hands, without agents behind them, without the insulation of Hollywood machinery. They did it in the streets, in borrowed rooms, with real sweat, real fear, real laughter. So when people talk about the cast of Kids, they don't speak in past tense. They speak in echoes. Because those performances didn't fade. They stuck. And the world has never looked away since.